Hello, my name is Eric Moore, and I'm representing the English Language Testing Society in the Testing in 10 interview. My guest today is Brenda Robati, the CEO of the Language Company. Welcome, Brenda, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Our sponsor for today is the ITEP company and ITEP's tests. Thank you so much for your sponsorship of the interview. So Brenda, your organization has conducted proficiency testing of some very large groups during the COVID-19 pandemic. And what was that like?
Well, it was very challenging. I think online testing brought some unique situations to the forefront, but also unique to us because of the large number of people we're testing, 300, 400, 500 students at a time. It brought a lot of challenges. I think the first challenge was making sure that we had an online exam that would be accepted by the institutions that we test for. So making sure that that approval process was in place, which required you to report, we're changing the type of exam we're using. We're going to be doing an online environment. Is that going to be acceptable to you? So getting that in place first. I think the largest challenge was finding, using an exam that was going to be accessible to our testers. And as most people are aware, internet accessibility and in China, which is where we do a large amount of our testing, is quite a challenge. And so we were lucky that ITEP was in a position to offer the online testing immediately. And so that made it possible for us to actually test these large number of students online, because without that, these students would not have been able to meet their proficiency requirements, and we would not have been able to get these students enrolled in the university. So that was really a challenge, and we were excited to find such a solution. I think the second thing, of course, was once you had the solution, what unique situations arise from doing an online exam with that large number of people. And I think working out the scheduling, and in more particular, working out the way we were going to do it that would ensure that the validity and integrity of the exam remained. Those were the big issues.
Certainly. And the shift to the preponderance of online testing, online proficiency testing and classroom testing during the pandemic has brought, cheating and other test security issues, back to the forefront of many language educators' minds. And what have your experiences been with online cheating and online testing?
Well, cheating on proficiency exams is nothing new. We know that. I mean, students, although we wish they would put that much effort and energy into passing the exam, we know that they oftentimes put a lot of effort and energy and creativity into cheating on the exam. And online was no different. Students are quick. They're very knowledgeable of the technology, and oftentimes more knowledgeable than we educators are. And so we found immediately students were able to purchase ear sets that were operated by Bluetooth that allowed them to communicate with people not even in the testing room. And they could do that without any detection whatsoever. So we had to find ways to search for that. Students were very creative about having other students present in the room, but not viewable through the cameras. They oftentimes even ran cords maybe to other rooms that had a second monitor or a second keyboard attached so that that student could be entering the information. So that was another way that students found to cheat. And we worked with our test administrator, our testing agency, testing provider to work on security protocols that made that even more difficult to do. I think one of the things that we dealt with large groups, it's not as much of a problem with smaller groups or with doing testing that's, from anywhere in the country or anywhere in that country, was that our students all knew each other. There were 300 or 400 or 500 students who knew each other, who shared dorm rooms with each other, who were taking the test at the same time. And so it takes a lot of effort on the part the test maker to the developer to have sufficient prompts that can be randomly generated, and to be able to create new test material that will prevent that type of sharing to be done almost immediately, because they're going to do that. And if you have 20 friends and they all just write down their prompt, you've already compromised a lot of the random generation of those prompts.
I feel like often the question that educators in language testing like ourselves that we find is exactly what you mentioned earlier. We're thinking that why couldn't the students put the effort into their studies and their practice instead of finding such creative ways to get around this? But it has been something that's been going on for a long time, and we may never be able to, end it completely. As technology changes, the students they're in a better position perhaps than we are to be able to modify what they're doing. Yeah, certainly. Good.
We're still humans, no matter how hard we.
That's right.
It's always going to be there. Yeah.
Certainly, sure. Changing our topic a little bit, you've served on both test standards and accreditation boards in the past. And what have the most important issues outside of COVID been, and have they stayed the same in your opinion over time?
I think some have always been prevalent, but their intensity or their importance changes over time, oftentimes with politics. But I think one issue, the main issue that has remained consistent and continues, is accreditation itself. When the idea was that making accreditation a legal requirement by SCVP, the idea was that we would have an even playing field, that would create an even playing field for all ESL programs, whether they're located in a university or they're located independently. They would all be playing again with the same set of rules. And that didn't happen. It turned out to be obviously much more complicated than people imagined. And so the varied accreditation bodies and how the processes that are in place for those accreditation bodies have meant that an even playing field doesn't exist even today. So I think that issue continues to be prevalent. I think an issue that wasn't so important in the past and is becoming in the forefront now is length of programs, because SCVP now has given notice that they're looking at the length of programs and possibly limiting how long an F1 student can be on an ESL I-20. And that means that accrediting bodies also have to address this issue. Now, all accrediting bodies have some standards that apply to length of program, but it's not common for those to be as prescriptive as saying this is the amount of time you cannot exceed. And so that's going to become a very heated and a long debate on how to address should SCVP move forward with making that policy or rulemaking. That will become a bigger issue. I think that SCVP is looking to, when they say student has to be making satisfactory academic progress, they're looking for that to be defined in the length of the program. And I think that's where the complication is going to become. I think an issue that perhaps was always in consideration before, but after the pandemic becomes or has already become a major issue for IEPs, is that how to have valid and affordable testing, placement testing. There are standards in accreditation that address this, and oftentimes they want it to be a widely accepted exam or a based on some proficiency scale that's understood and widely accepted, like the CEFR or something of that nature. And so institutions who have been, as we all know, financially devastated by COVID and are seeking to make that climb back out, addressing the cost of placement testing is going to become an issue. So I think it's important for, and I know ITEP has addressed this issue with many of its institutions, and it's important for the test providers to be flexible and understanding of the IEPs at this time and to respond to that concern, because I think it'll make a huge difference on what is available for use for the institutions. Mm-hmm. And I think Finally, I would say the biggest issue that I think exists right now, and I'm happy to see that our politicians are responding to that, is the competition abroad. If IEPs are going to recover from the effects of COVID and the financial drain that it has caused, we have to become competitive abroad. And that is related to all kinds of agencies, SCVP policies, immigration policies, um, the trade organizations and the trade bodies that exist within our regulations, and having our politicians address that and try to make it more conducive to attract the import of internationals to purchase our educational products. That's going to become critical in the next couple of years.
Sure, there are other options out there that may be closer in some ways to where the
And quite less
home
expensive.
country,
Yeah.
and less expensive, and other considerations that may affect how parents feel about their children or students, caretakers, choosing where the student will study. My last question for you: how do you think testing will look when the pandemic has finally receded? And asking this question, we may both have the feeling, or our listeners also may have the feeling that this is not necessarily receding very much right now, but I think at some point we're going to get around this. And but what do you think it'll look like post-COVID?
Well, I think like we're seeing the trend in education and higher education, that many institutions are saying, hey, this online thing works and our students like it. And we might, there's a major shift in large institutions to more online offerings or more online degree programs. I think a lot of the testing will move towards and continue to move towards online testing. I think that will require a lot of investment from the testing companies in security measures and abilities to make sure that those tests are valid and that they are producing reliable results. I think, you might call me old school, but I really believe that if an institution wants to have the best possible solution to their English proficiency testing or even their English placement testing, I think having a combination of that online testing, which is convenient and inexpensive and accessible, and adding to that a human factor of whether that be a Zoom interview or a phone conversation, or even just when the student arrives on campus, having a separate, not maybe a separate evaluation of that student, maybe based on the institution's objectives or program objectives, that give that added assurance that you have an accurate assessment of that student's proficiency. To me, that's still always going to be the best solution, is a balanced approach to testing.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's a great idea. Well, Brenda Robati, the CEO of the language company, thank you so much for your time with me today. And I'd like to also thank the ITEP company for your sponsorship of this interview, and hope to see everybody next month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.